So we read a lot about polls and surveys and exit polling and exit surveys, but one of the things that exit polls cannot show, or actually really any polls, are the people who just aren't likely voters anymore. Maybe they voted before and now they're not voting for some reason. I'm pointing this out because we're seeing exit surveys since the election trying to find all these reasons why Kamala Harris lost, because really she shouldn't have. I've talked before about disappointed voters who were justice voters who maybe stayed home. So here's the thing. When you look at the polls, they say likely voters, okay? And that's usually who they poll, likely voters. And so when you do exit polling, you are only polling the people who voted. You are not polling the people who didn't vote. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, why would we vote? Why would we poll people who don't vote? And I think it's really important. I think it's really instructive because I think in this case, in 2024, it might be the answer to everything. And I talked a little bit about this in a video I did yesterday. But justice voters, okay, democracy voters, people who left the GOP, became independents or became Democrats, maybe people who were still Republicans didn't bother to change their registration because they figure, well, it matters when we vote for in the general election. So I think that there were a lot of people, and I think a lot, who simply didn't vote. These are people who voted in 2020 because Trump alarmed them. The Trump crimes, remember at that point, we didn't even have the January 6th insurrection, sedition, treason, dead cops. We didn't have hang Mike Pence. We didn't know about the pipe bombs. We didn't know that the Secret Service were so not trusted by the vice president that he wouldn't even get in the car with them because he knew they were going to take him somewhere because Trump didn't want him to certify the vote. All right. This was before Be There, It'll Be Wild. This was before we found out about the cache of weapons across the river in Virginia that Trump allies had because they were ready to use them. They had every intention of storming the Capitol with guns and killing people. This was before people were going through the Capitol, the Trump allies, the insurrectionists, the domestic terrorists were going through our Capitol yelling to try and find Nancy Pelosi to kill her. This was before the gallows were erected on the lawn of the Capitol building, my old workplace. I worked on Capitol Hill for Congress for many, many years. Lived on Capitol Hill, owned a home on Capitol Hill, decades. This was my neighborhood. This was my home. This was my office, This was before Trump's insurrectionists, on his demand, at his request, went through the Capitol and smeared their feces on the walls and the floors of our Capitol building. This was before they went in with the, what do you call them? Those things they wore on the wrist when they were going to tie the hands up. I forget the name of those. Okay? This is before all of that. This was before the stolen documents that we found out about them. And remember, we only found out about them because when Merrick Garland finally gave in and allowed the FBI to go in and forcibly remove at least some of the stolen top secret classified documents that Trump had stashed away in the pool house at Mar-a-Lago and the bathrooms of Mar-a-Lago. We have even saw photos of them sitting openly on a table in the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago. People die because of this. This is before they found him in his storage unit. They've been trying to get them from him for a while, and we never knew we had them. Merrick Garland hid that from us. In fact, even with the raid, we found out from Trump instead of Merrick Garland. So voters before this knew that Trump was a criminal and a thug and a traitor. They knew. They knew about the 10 counts of obstruction of justice in the Mueller report. Now, MAGA pretended they might have said, well, it's not true or something. So there were some people who decided it wasn't true and that it was a witch hunt, which of course it wasn't. And they didn't bother reading the bipartisan GOP-led Senate report showing that Russia interfered in our elections. You know, there's again, this chaos of Trump and all the stuff that he did with Putin and the Russians, telling Putin's people classified information in the Oval Office, destroying the notes of the person who would take notes and the interpreters, the transcribers. This all shows how guilty he was. This just isn't something anyone does, let alone presidents, okay? So, but voters knew about this. Enough voters, smart voters knew. They were paying attention, all right? Smart people knew there was something very, very wrong with Trump, very, very off with Trump. There was obviously concern about how on election night he was losing. In fact, the exit polling showed that he lost. And they were supposed to have that secret exit polling the media consortium had, but their plant at ABC News, who was trying to become the communications director in the Trump White House, gave it to them. The polls were still open. It was 5:01 on election night, 5 o'clock on the East Coast. And after that, 77,000 votes, perfectly distributed among 3 battleground states, showed up. And Trump won the Electoral College, even though he lost the popular vote. People knew about this. They knew that Trump was a criminal. So they were voting for justice because that's what we were promised. That's what we wanted. That's what we needed. That's what we expected in the United States of America. And then we get Merrick Garland. Nothing happened. Okay? We get Merrick Garland and nothing happened. So in 2020, people were voting for justice. And then they saw even more crimes being committed. The insurrection, the stolen documents. Trump adjudicated for rape of E. Jean Carroll, and much, much more. They saw his pardons and the quid pro quos, and they heard about him selling pardons. So while you might think, well, this is even more reason for people to show up and vote in 2024, what they saw was nothing being done by Merrick Garland. He wasn't just slow. He wasn't incompetent. He's complicit. He intended to let Trump off the hook. Voters saw this. People who were terrified and concerned about Trump in 2020 voted for justice. Maybe they'd always voted for Republicans. Maybe they were ticket splitters. Maybe they sometimes voted, sometimes didn't. But they showed up in 2020 to vote him out of office and vote for justice. 4 years later, they saw nothing happening, and they knew. They knew. They probably thought, well, both sides are the same. So they didn't vote. They didn't show up. And that's what I think happened. So exit polling, these exit surveys that we're reading about why did this happen? This shouldn't have happened. Trump shouldn't have won. Why did he win? Why did Democrats lose? Is the answer that we need. That's the question that should be asked. But in exit polling, in exit surveys, you're only talking to people who voted. So they tell us nothing. Why did you vote this way or that way? What they don't find out is how many people voted in 2020 and stayed home in 2024. Okay? And a lot did. And they did so because of Merrick Garland letting us down. You know, Nancy Pelosi told us after the Mueller report she wasn't going to impeach. we're going to let the voters speak. Well, the voters spoke in 2020, and then we were let down. The justice voters voted in 2020. We did our job. Now, I did vote in 2024, obviously, but I'm a different animal. I'm a political animal. Of course I'm going to. But I'm talking about regular Americans. When they were told if they voted in 2020, that would take care of things, because Mueller didn't. And Democrats weren't going to impeach for the Mueller report, which meant Trump had a green light. He knew it. It didn't matter what happened later. The die was already cast. So that's what happened. So the exit polling that you see now, the exit surveys with everybody trying to say, find out why this happened, they don't include the people who didn't vote and why they didn't vote. And I think that is absolutely critical to this last election. And there should be a lesson in it. And I don't know if people are in denial. They don't want to admit it. Too many people got rich and famous defending Garland. I don't know what the deal is. But it seems to me that it's this big glaring hole in this whole discussion, this thing that no one's talking about. Nobody wants to address it. It's insane. I mean, I've been working in politics for decades, and this to me is something that just seems so obvious. So when I'm scrolling through my phone and I'm looking at all of these discussions and these tweets about exit polling, it really pisses me off. Either the people having this discussion, or I don't want to say they're stupid, but there's this whole thing over here that they're not addressing. It's really important. The people who voted in 2020 and didn't vote in 2024 are very likely the people who got Trump in office this time. I hate that they did it. It's stupid. I'm not arguing in favor of them, but I am telling you why. The justice voters. We had podcasters with entire careers built on this. Justice Matters, Glenn Kirshner. He's wonderful. He should be AG. We had Kamala Harris right out of the gate. I'm the prosecutor. He's the felon. So instinctively, we knew how important this was. In fact, it was everything, because we couldn't believe that people would actually vote for this criminal, this traitor, this rapist, this money launderer, this Putin puppet, this disgusting human being, Trump, this violent insurrectionist. We couldn't believe it. And I think that we just sort of started wearing this veil of assuming that everybody knew and accepted what he was. But without the justice that we voted for in 2020, and that we were promised, all it takes is a relatively small portion of those voters who were let down and betrayed to say, you know what, they're all crooks, they're all the same, to stay home and hand this election to Donald Trump and to the Republicans. And as the counts get tighter and tighter, and we realize that Trump won this election, this popular vote, by one of the slimmest margins of any president in the history of this country, and that the Republican House majority is going to be just minuscule. It is ludicrous, it is irresponsible, and I'm thinking intellectually dishonest for us not to have a big, loud, splashy discussion about the justice voters who stayed home. Because it's been such a big, huge, pivotal part of our lives. Justice, 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 accountability. No one is above the law. The prosecutor versus the felon. Justice matters. Every segment on CNN and MSNBC, almost every segment was about justice and accountability for Trump. We didn't get it. We didn't get it. So all it takes is a relatively small number of people who, like I said, maybe they weren't regular voters in the past, but this got them going. This got them to the polls in 2020. We're going to vote this criminal out of office because we can't have this in America. And then they see the insurrection and they see the stolen documents and they see a lot of other things. And they're thinking, well, of course we're going to get justice any day now. There's going to be indictments. There has to be. Trump is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And then he didn't. Nothing happened. Nothing happened to his top people. Nothing happened to Ginny Thomas. Nothing happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Oh, what about those MAGA Republican House members all asking for pardons? Anybody curious why? Merrick Garland? Anybody home? So the more I think about this, and I'm really thinking about it when I see these exit polls, these exit surveys, what the experts are trying to figure out is that exit polling only polls people who voted. Is the people who didn't vote, the people who voted in 2020, they voted for justice, they feel betrayed, they stayed home in 2024. And I think we need to start accepting that. Any other explanations, I don't know if it's just people wanting to hear themselves talk, the navel gazers are trying to sound smart, or they have some kind of an agenda. I don't know what it is. But when I see people not even looking at the justice voters of 2020 who stayed home in 2024, I just want to give up. When you think of how much of our news, how much of our social media, and if you're a person who interacts on social media, it was probably a huge part of your life to be tracking this stuff, waiting for justice. So think about the people that don't spend as much time on it as you do, but they know. They're like, well, yeah, we got to take care of this. And they just instinctively knew that something was up when nothing happened. And they stayed home. I'm telling you, that's what I think happened. And I'm usually right about this stuff.